The TCG Design Theory podcast is part of the Booster Pack Network. For more TCG-related content, visit theboosterpacknetwork.com. Hosting for this show is sponsored by Category 1 Games, the go-to shop for all of your classic TCG needs. Find your favorites or discover something new at category1games.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the TCG Design Theory podcast. My name is Jay, and today we're going to be talking about the Paragon Monsters and Mayhem TCG, and I have Chris Haskins here with me. He's the lead designer of Paragon. So Chris, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So what we're going to do in this episode, and it's a little bit different than what we've done before, but we're going to focus purely on your game and kind of talk about the design process from start to where you currently are now. But before we get into that, can you kind of walk us through your history with trading card games or even tabletop games in general, from your introduction to that space up until your decision that you wanted to design one?
Well, yeah, my experience as a player has been with games like Magic the Gathering, a little bit of exposure to Yu-Gi-Oh! My brother's a huge Yu-Gi-Oh! Fan. And then, of course, Pokemon. I think everyone's had some exposure to Pokemon either through the show or the card game. But Magic the Gathering really is where I've played most of the TCGs in my life. And then, obviously we've got now a new one out, Flesh and Blood, over the past few years. So I've seen that a little bit as well. But as far as like my overall gaming experience really is heavily geared toward role-playing games. So Dungeons and Dragons, most of the versions going back to second edition, and then games like Pathfinder, Rifts and stuff like that. So I'm mostly a role-playing game enthusiast when it comes to tabletop. And of course, like I said, Magic the Gathering has been a great game and enjoyed that for many years, but I haven't really gotten heavily into it. It was a few years ago, maybe 2012 through 2014 that I was playing. I got back into it. I first saw it as a little kid. We're talking like 1993, 94. So I must have been about 9 or 10 years old at the time, and it was neat and interesting. But I mostly was interested in comics back then, so didn't really get into it too much back then. But friends got into it a little bit more as we got older, and so about 2012, 2013, 2014, I got back into it, and I've enjoyed it very much. But like I said, role-playing games is really where my main focus has been for a very long time, about 20, 25 years.
And so with your focus in role-playing games and knowing that there's some similarities between those and, regular tabletop kind of all in a box games and trading card games, and knowing that you have some history and experience with creating products and things like that for role-playing game experiences, what kind of nudged you in the direction of thinking about trading card game design, and what kind of flared that interest back up for you recently?
Well, when it comes to our role-playing game products, I'm the CEO of Nord Games as well. So we've developed a lot of products for fifth edition D&D over the past 10 years. And our focus is always about how can we make the game better, faster, easier, just for people to play. And one of the things that we happened upon was downtime activities. And it occurred to us that we could create an in-world trading card game that your heroes and commoners and stuff actually collect these cards and play. And that made me think about Triple Triad from Final Fantasy. And I said, well, Triple Triad was a great game. Like, really enjoyed playing that inside Final Fantasy VIII. In my case, I haven't played a lot of the newer ones, but Final Fantasy VIII, you could collect these cards of the monsters that you encountered in the world, and then the heroes that you encountered and the villains and stuff. So that became sort of the origin. And then there, of course, in the Witcher game, you've got things like Gwent. And we just thought, what if we created a trading card game that sort of has that origin, the lore behind it essentially is um, the idea that within your role-playing game world, you have these cards that you collect that are depicting creatures and heroes and villains that you interact with in that world. And it's not, specific to, let's say, fifth edition or Pathfinder or anything like that. It's just, whatever role playing game world you're playing in, it probably includes these pretty standard types of monsters and these pretty standard types of heroes and all that. So that's really the original origin of it. So there's a bit of triple triad in there. There's some D&D. The card effects and stuff have a lot of Magic the Gathering inspired abilities and effects and stuff. But of course, it's built on top of a rule set that is none of those. It's entirely its own thing, entirely unique, but it's drawing a lot of inspiration from these other games.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm very familiar with Final Fantasy VIII and Triple Triad. Wanting to, I think, if I remember correctly, the mechanics where you had to go out and you had to fight the monsters, and then you could like take the essence of the card from them, or like get enough essences to craft the card. And I know they've had a couple iterations since then. And of course, you brought up Gwent. I know Genshin Impact has a huge card game built into their game that you cannot play separately. At least at this point, you can't. Um, and so it's interesting that a lot of games tend to go that route. And I think the inspiration for your game coming from, hey, this is kind of what you see and while you're role playing and while you're in these worlds and in these adventures, and it's given that sense of familiarity, but also, as you said, kind of building on a lot of things and then bringing it to something all on its own. So, going into that, you bring up Triple Triad, and I think anybody who's played Triple Triad, when they see Paragon, is going to instantly recognize some of those mechanics. Um, what exactly kind of inspired you about Triple Triad and those types of grid-based games that you wanted to bring over into Paragon?
I think it was the simplicity and speed. So a game with Triple Triad, it's just the numbers. Our game, has numbers and a little bit more to it, but it's the speed at which the game happens and the just overall simplicity of the cards. It doesn't have to be crazy complex. And when we set out upon our design journey, we thought, what are some goals here? We want the game to be fun, but what does that include? Are we going after, super heavy crunch? Are we going after interesting lore? Are we going after quick gameplay? What makes it fun? And I think we identified a few things. One was that we wanted it to be fast. So the game ends on the 10th turn. There is a caveat to that, which is there is an overtime mechanic in the case that you might tie. There's an overtime mechanic. So that is a factor, but still, you have 10 turns to control the majority of the battlefield. That's the gist of it. So, unless you do, then you're knocked out. Which also allows for more than two players to be added pretty easily. You can play 3-player, 4-player, really as high as you want to go within reason that can fit around the table, because whoever doesn't control the majority of the battlefield just gets knocked out. And so if you're low on the totem pole, boom, you're out. And now it's just let's say, goes from 4 to 3-player, then down to 2-player, and then it's, those people until one of them is knocked out. So that was, I think the speed at which you can play the game, because of the simplicity of the numbers and how it's positional. So I've got a couple of examples here. I've prepared a couple of examples. So, for example, if let me just grab. Here we go. We got a Rogue of Smothering and a Shadow Dark Mantle. So if you're to set these two cards side by side, their combat values, which let's say that this is the attacker, this is the defender, their combat values are matching each other. Therefore, no damage goes to the Dark Mantle, because the amount of damage coming at them is 1, the amount of defense they have is 1. So easy. But if you were to put this card, let's say here, and let's say that the Rug of Smothering is attacking the Shadow Dark Mantle, you've got a 3 versus a 2. So you're able to penetrate their defenses and damage them for 1 hit point. And they've got two hit points. So they survive the attack, but they're defeated, which means they join the attacker's team. So that just, to me, going through and trying to combine concepts of these multiple games together and create a game that was interesting and didn't just have a, I put down a card, I get a point. Well, there's a chance that you could lose that point, or that point can go to your opponent, which I think is a pretty neat thing. And combining it with creatures and monsters and heroes and villains that have a certain play style, and then creating this lore around that as well. So there's familiar aspects for D&D players, there's familiar aspects for people who have played Triple Triad, and there's familiar aspects for people who have played things like Magic the Gathering. Most card games have aspects that Magic the Gathering uses. I know that there's an awful lot to Magic the Gathering that is original, but at like nowadays, any card game is going to have things like play this card, draw a card, play this card and add a token creature, play this card and your hand size increases, all those kinds of things. Those basic mechanics are going to be in most card games. But I think that Magic has done a really good job of connecting, in many cases, connecting the abilities to the lore of the creature or concept of the card that they publish. So in our case, what we're trying to do is make sure that the abilities that these cards have, if they're a creature, let's say, are correct for what that creature would do in a fantasy role-playing game world. So it's been a challenge, but it's been neat to come up with these ideas and go, oh, okay, well, because this creature is, let's say, a lion weight predator that relies on stealth, well, we're going to give it abilities that allow it to do that in our game. And it's been fun. It's been a really interesting design process. And overall, I feel like we've created something really unique. Obviously, taking inspiration from other games that are out there, but creating something new and unique from those different components.
Hmm. And so, I know you're talking about like there's already this established lore with these monsters and heroes and villains that you kind of take those thematic elements and put them into the mechanics of the game, which gives everybody that familiarity so that, you're learning a new game, you're playing something that you haven't played before, something that is unique, but you are familiar with goblins, you're familiar with slimes that are in dungeons and things like that. So I think that's really interesting. When you guys, when your team decided, to start, designing this game, right? And I find a lot of people who are probably going to be listening to this show are probably having a hard time with, where do I dedicate most of my time? Where do I start? Where's the most productive? What is the most productive use of my time? When you guys really got down to it, what were some of the very first steps you took to really get this project going?
I think the first thing you have to do, because if you have an idea and you just think, okay, I've got an idea for a game. It's going to obviously have probably numbers on the cards, and it'll have, information on the cards that people need to find. Coming up with that layout of the card and like how it's going to be displayed and how best it's going to get the information across to the player, because that's their main interface. That's going to be one of the most important aspects of the graphic design element of the game. The game itself, in my opinion, games need to be fun. So make yourself a list of like must haves. And that's probably one of the top ones. A game must be fun. And sometimes you design a game and it's not. And then you make one little tweak to it, and all of a sudden that one rule change completely, beefed it up, and now all of a sudden it is fun to play. But that's basically a place to start, is look at how you're going to display your information, even if it's just doodling stuff on blank cards, which, by the way, you can go to Game Crafter and get sets of blank cards for cheap. They're already cut and already the right size and everything, and then just get a Sharpie or something with a bold tip, and do your rules and everything on each card. That's nice for prototyping. But then beyond that, now we're going into like the actual game design, like what do the cards do? How do you win? All those things. You've just got to establish, like, throw out your first ideas and then try it, play it, see if it works. If it's not fun or not as fun as you thought it might be, then look at what the rules are. Well, what are the win conditions? Why did did it take too long, or was it too short? Did someone win on turn 1 or 2? These are all things that you try to figure out. So, for example, our game, you just simply can't win on turn 1 or 2 because that's not possible. You can't control that much of the battlefield. And besides, even if you did, let's say, take control of the entire battlefield through some weird combination of cards, um, your opponent has until turn 10 to take it back from you. So that just doesn't work. So things like that. And you've got to think also, what are aspects of games I currently play that I don't like? And how could I create a game that eliminates that from the equation? So some people don't like the concept of, like in Magic, you can have infinite loops where something triggers something, which triggers something, which then it just spirals. My friend Jay, who's actually a part of the design team, he and I played some Magic back when I was getting into it back in like 2012, 2013 timeframe. And he said, "Oh, you want to play? I've got this deck, the red deck." And I was like, "Oh, cool, let's try it." I'm playing black and green or something like that. And on turn 2, he wins. And I'm like, "How did that happen?" And he said, "Well, this card allows me to do this, which allows me to do this, which takes your hit points down by 1 each time it happens, and it's an infinite loop. So it just you end up dying." I was like, "Oh, okay, that's not fun." So those are the kinds of things, like, and that's people build those decks specifically for that kind of outcome, and that's fine, but that's not what we want in our game. So uh, also, I'm trying to identify your target audience. Do we want to go with Paragon? Are we trying to go after people who are just hardcore, all about the crunch, or are we trying to go after people who are more casual? Well, probably a little bit of both, and that's why you make a game possibly that enables from a big spectrum, for example, of people to new players, seasoned veterans, and people that like the lore, like the crunch, like the simplicity. They all can customize their decks accordingly. So, and that's where you have additional layers of complexity in our game in Paragon. Like, well, what makes it unique? How are cards sorted and organized? And that was a brilliant stroke of genius by Jay, actually, who said, "You know what?" Because originally my idea was all cards would be based on damage type. Only problem is, in D&D there's like 13 different damage types, and that's just too much. Too much to try to have every single card type be a different color, and all that stuff. Because that's the other thing is, design wise, you want these cards to be very different from each other. When you pick one up, you can tell immediately what type it is. So Jay came up with the idea of domains, and he said, well, what if we have domains that are indicating the style of play of that card? And so the domains was definitely the point where we really took off and understood, now we can make these groups of cards that are played in a certain way. It doesn't mean that any domain is necessarily better than other domains. They're just different, and they cater toward one of our other goals, which was customizability and self-expression. So if a player could identify with a certain play style, then they could customize their deck accordingly. And they could also get wrapped up in the lore of all the different creatures and heroes and villains of that domain. So we went with 6 domains, and then we by default have a 7th, which is the non-domain, like the domainless cards. But the domains were life, order, ether, death, chaos, and might. Um, and the idea of that, and then domainless would be nothing, none of those. And the idea of that is, you have cards that fall into one of those domains, 2 of those domains, 3 of those domains, and possibly more than that. And what's neat about that is our game is played somewhat more close to like Commander from Magic than it would be standard, because and also a bit more like D&D, because there's a Paragon, which is your character basically. So you're taking on the role of this character while you're playing. and this character sitting off to the side, they can be put into the battlefield. They can be mortally wounded and stuff like that, but they act as either a support, which they've got, this is a double sided card. So they act as a support character in the support zone, or they can go onto the battlefield and now they've got combat values and other abilities that they can activate. So that then allowed us to say, oh, well, based on your paragon of your deck, that decides or dictates what cards can be in that deck. So, for example, this is the life and order paragon. All the cards in her deck can be life and order, or one of the other. So they could be a dual domain like her, or they can be life by itself or ordered by itself. But it's also domainless. You can have domainless cards in any deck if you want. But those are sort of like jack of all trades, master of none. They're more general cards, and the idea there is create now. Take this domain wheel, if you will, and now identify things like, okay, every domain can draw cards, but it's how you're able to draw cards with an ability on the card. So let's say that the might domain is the you defeat a creature, you can draw a card because you're showing off your strength. The death domain, when you slay a creature, you can draw a card. The life domain, when you create a creature or summon a creature or something like that, create new life, you can draw a card. When you, in the ether domain, when you cast a spell, you can draw a card. These are the kinds of things, and I'm not saying every time you do these things you can do in the game. I'm just saying if there was an ability that said draw a card, each domain would do it in a different way, would have a different condition by which they're able to do that ability. So the idea here is we don't restrict certain abilities to only certain core abilities to only certain domains. We let all domains do these things. They just do them differently.
Mhm. And so, talking through those mechanics and how you kind of arrived at those decisions, changing out the damage types for domains and things like that. How often would you find yourself, going back to those initial goals that you guys set up? I mean, did those, you know, that being the very first thing it seems like that you guys did was, okay, what do I want from this game, and how much of that stayed the same, and how much of that, how many of those goals and kind of ideals changed over time as you guys worked through some of these designs?
That's an excellent question. Yeah, you're always checking back. I used to have a big whiteboard in my office, and we would write our notes and everything on there. But at the top, we're identifying what are the main goals of the design. Why are we playing this game? And what should we always check back on and make sure we're still adhering to? And every single time you make any change, even minor changes, you go back and you check and you make sure, are we still achieving our goals? Is the game still fast to play? Okay. Are the rules still simple? Okay. Is it still fun? Okay. As long as you're checking all of those things off each time you make a revision to the game, especially if it's game rules, because the mechanics of the game may not change all that much as far as like, cards go down on the field and creatures fight, you cast spells and all that stuff. That might not change that much over the time of the game. But we went from having, I think it was like 4 phases of play down to 3 phases of play, and we were trying to figure out, well, when can you do this, when can you do that? And in D&D there's the concept of quicken spells, which are spells you can basically throw out super quick. So we're like, okay, well, if we're inspired from D&D for the how spells are cast, how does that play into our game? Okay, make that change now. Is it still fun? Is it still fast to play? Can you still customize all that stuff? And each time that a major revision is made, the whole team has to get together and make sure, okay, are we all on board with this? That's another thing to consider, is you might have team members who have created something and they're really, really adamant they want that to stay in the game. And someone else comes along in the team and goes, well, actually, if we do it this way, in my opinion, it makes it better. And you go, well, hang on, are we completely snuffing out someone's brilliant idea in favor of what's just the latest and greatest idea that someone on the team come up with. So that's another thing, is be respectful of other people on the team. If you're just by yourself, then it's no big deal. But when you're dealing with a whole team of people, you have to be respectful of other people's ideas and opinions and stuff. Luckily, we have a great team that works well together, and I think that there's always a yes and opinion. Like you try to build off of each other and be okay with perhaps cutting away some things that seemed great at the time, but then as you develop the game further, you realize they could go and it will improve the game. So you're sort of streamlining, putting an awful lot of clay on the model, so to speak, and then shaving away the parts you don't need for a better end result.
Mhm. And I like how you brought up the team and kind of needing to work together because there are definitely people, myself included, who definitely tend to veer towards working on things by themselves and wanting all that control and to be able to make all those decisions. And understanding that you're working with a team of designers and people who are inputting their ideas onto the game, you're having to kind of make those compromises because it may not be something that you personally necessarily think is good, but that if it's something that everybody can kind of agree on, that it is going to be more appealing and in a stronger game. But that kind of leads me into another interesting aspect, which is you have this game. It's internal to your design team, um, and then eventually you guys want to start getting it into the hands of playtesters and things like that. So, what are some of those first steps that you take? I say first steps a lot. The next steps that you take when it comes to saying, okay, I think we're at a place where we can share our game to a limited number of people and really start building that kind of grassroots community of people who are interested in this type of game, who can give us valuable feedback and getting them involved in the process. So, what are some of the things that you guys did in regards to that?
Yeah, if you consider each one of these uh, portions of design as being their own phases. So, early on, you've got the idea phase, and you're coming up with a lot of ideas, throwing an awful lot of things on the whiteboard and seeing what makes sense. And you come away with a design you'd like to prototype. Then you're in the prototyping phase of, okay, this is how the cards might look, and you always use words like might. You don't want to ever say stuff like, this is how they will look and this is the end design, blah blah blah. Even now there's still stuff we're like, well, we could potentially change that. You still, I mean, until these things are printed and all that, you've got a lot of opportunity to make modifications. So after that phase, then you're into more of the playtesting phase, and that's internal playtesting oftentimes with your team, and then you make it available to a select group of people, then maybe the general public. What we did was we had our internal people test it and test it and test it like crazy. We used things like virtual tabletop. There's a great resource. You can upload all of your card artwork and everything, and it makes a virtual version of the game. And it's very rudimentary. It won't do stuff automatically for you, but you can play the game as if you were playing across the table from each other. Just a little bit clunkier for those of us, who are on mouse and keyboard and stuff like that, trying to flip cards and whatnot. But you essentially have everything you need to pretty quickly playtest and make sure that the game actually works. Does the game function the way that we intend to? Now you invite people that have nothing to do with the game, have never seen the game before, and from all different walks of life. People that play tabletop games, people that play trading card games, people that play, maybe don't play much games at all. And then you see, give them their rules, give them, the chance to play against each other and just watch. Usually don't want to interject anything. Let them break your game essentially, or find problems with your instructions because you weren't specific enough. This instruction is too vague and therefore it caused confusion. Okay, well, now you need to go and fix that instruction. This description on the card, too confusing. Are we talking about my monster or my creature, someone else's creature? What do I do? So this is how you can make your rules better and better and better, either the description of them, or tweak things to where, oh, you know what, everyone, they're naturally assuming this, and it doesn't hurt the game at all to do it like that. So why won't we just do it like that? And of course, with a large enough test audience, you don't want to. Oh, one person interpreted it this way, so we need to change the entire thing. No, it's more like, well, you know, 90% of the players had assumed this, and if that really doesn't break our game or make it, not conform to our goals, then we can totally make that change to where that is how the game functions. An example for Paragon was originally we had it set up. Let me grab a couple of more monsters. We had it set up to where uh, creatures would always need to be played in such an orientation where their titles were lined up and all their text was aligned correctly. And oftentimes, like the way we play it is we just play it at like this. I play my creatures, with their text facing to my right. You play it with your text facing to your left, and it was fine. I think that's a cool thing for people to watch because then all of the cards are facing the correct way for people who are watching it. Let's say, but in actual gameplay, me versus you, there's actually no reason why we can't play them where they're, my cards are facing me and your cards are facing you. It even brought up ideas like, well, what about a card ability that allows me to rotate the card so that I can, let's say, when I place this card down, I can rotate the defending creature's card so that I can attack from, let's say, a more vulnerable position. So we implemented that rule and now it's no big deal. People can choose, oh, we're all going to play with the cards facing this way. I'm going to play with my cards facing me. You're going to play your cards with your cards facing you. You just determine that at the beginning of the game and it's no big deal because at the end of the day, the numbers on the cards is what you're concerned about. And their orientation when they go down adds for a little bit more variety, and even adds for like I said, abilities that could modify that when placing the cards down or even after the cards have been placed down. So a little bit more uh, options for cool abilities and stuff. So that was a cool player observation that we were just like, well, there's no reason why it can't be played like that. So yeah, let's do it. And that was after determining it couldn't be played like there was no reason it couldn't be played like that. It wasn't just something we're like, oh yeah, let's do it. It was more like, well, let's talk with the team and see. And then we play tested internally and said, yeah, ultimately it's not going to affect us that much, and even opens up opportunities for new abilities. So let's go for it.
So, you want to make the game as intuitive as possible. You want to make it to where players can, uh, you know, kind of just assume all the right things when they're seeing the card and when they're playing the game. But I also know that there's very different kinds of play testers out there. So there's ones that you tell them how the game is played, or you give them the rules, and they play it how they think it's meant to be played. And then you have the play testers that are like, I don't care what how you want this to go. I'm going to read exactly what these rules are and I'm going to try to demolish your game. I'm going to try to break every aspect of it as I can. And so with that in the playtesting phase, how much of that kind of focused playtesting did you guys do? Because I know there's a lot of players out there, especially those who are familiar with trading card games, that'll go in and try to break your game as quick as
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah. And we love those players. Even though it might seem like, why would you enjoy someone tearing down your creative work? Well, it's not so much tearing, unless they're coming at you and saying, your game's stupid, I hate it, whatever. We don't really have any of that. It's more of like, hey, I noticed that the term you're using for this is inconsistent with this other thing. So it's those kinds of things. We want those in D&D terms, like the rules lawyers, to really dive into the game and tell us where they're finding confusion. And I know that we haven't had that much of it. It's more like we're we're consistent with a term, but maybe we use the wrong term. Maybe it's just a little bit off from what we were intending, and there might be a better word for it. That's why having a thesaurus is amazing, to when you're developing something and you want to come up with interesting words for rules or things like that. Having a resource like that is extremely important, and also just a dictionary, just to make sure you are using the correct words for the correct concepts. But we do like those rule lawyers. We do like those people who are going to go through our game, pick it apart, and either break it, because we need to know, does this combo of cards in this specific use case break it? If so, we need to know that, because we want to avoid having those kinds of issues. Earlier, I mentioned a turn to win. We don't want that. We don't want it to be an infinite loop possibility. We want the game already plays fast enough. That's not the issue. We want the game to feel like it's progressing well and you are fighting over a battlefield. That's what we're trying to do. You're coming to the table with a deck that you have created that expresses your play style, and the objective is to take over the battlefield. And the battlefield ranges in size. For a 2-player game, it'll be a 4x4 grid. For a 3-player game, or probably 3 or 4, it'll be a 5x5 grid, and it just gets bigger and bigger the more players you have on it. And of course, it's positional. You're playing cards next to each other in order to attack and defend, each other. So it's one of those things where we want to make sure that the game has been properly tested and people are enjoying themselves. So far, we've been testing for, it's been about 6 months, and we've been using Tabletop Simulator. We created our own app that we put on Steam that we've been using to play test, and that's been a lot of fun too. We're porting it over to mobile, like iPhone and Android. We'll have it on our phones pretty soon, and iPads and stuff like that. So having all those people who have been involved in the playtesting process has been amazing, because they all have contributed something. Either they've come and said, "Yep, love it." I mean, the later people that have come more recently haven't really found any errors. It's more of like, they might have questions about, a certain type of creature, like, are we going to see more of this? Are we going to see more of this type of ability? I like this thing and this combo that I came up with, where if I have this guy and this guy on the battlefield at the same time, and this guy gets attacked, I can swap places, and stuff like that. So it's those things where we're confirming that our time spent designing, we were in the right zone. We didn't make anything that was wild, and totally broke the game or broke the spirit of that. Maybe not spirit, maybe like broke the theme of that domain, stuff like that. And then our design theory, as far as card rarity, really came down to common cards need to be played kind of as normal. Rare cards could start to introduce new rules, and um, ultra rares could, or no, excuse me, uncommon, excuse me, uncommon could introduce new rules. Rares could start to bend the rules, and ultra rares could break the rules, basically. So it would be sort of in this instance, this can happen. Whereas you're like, well, it's going outside of the rules, but that's part of that lore of that creature. It can do this special thing, and those are usually limited to like Paragon level creatures and ultra rare spells, or ultra rare creatures and stuff like that. And then also, just trying to make sure that, again, the game is still fun. How do you maintain that through hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of cards eventually? How do you make sure that the game still plays how you originally intended? New players can get into it easily. You don't have power creep. That's one of the biggest problems with most games, just in general, games in general, not even trading card games. You come out with an expansion to a tabletop game, and it's got better stuff in it than the original game. Like, okay, so that's kind of a bummer. If you can have different stuff that's not more powerful, then maybe that's a better goal. If all you ever do is come out with bigger and bigger numbers with each set, eventually, like, the cards from the original you can't play anymore, but B, there's going to be an awful lot of having to buy new cards in order to stay competitive, which was another of our goals. We didn't want that. We didn't want our game to be something where you always have to buy the latest and greatest stuff to simply play the game. And we wanted it to be, no, you can buy whatever cards you want from whatever set to express yourself, in the way that you want, and you don't have to always just keep up with all your friends. You could say, well, I've got a deck I built 10 years ago that I'm still really, really happy with. So one of our biggest goals at Nord Games, and that's coming over to Paragon, is enable the player to qualify themselves whether they're a good candidate. Should I even buy this thing? We want to explain as much as possible to our customers so that they can make good decisions about what they are buying and what they're not buying. So we don't want anybody to buy our products and then regret it and say, oh, this isn't what they said it was. I really am not enjoying myself, that kind of thing. So that's another one of our top priorities.
Right. And I think that gets into, I was going to touch on, kind of expanding the community and getting that early buy-in from people, but I kind of want to just jump into a little bit of the product design because you brought up, the fact that there's commons, uncommons, rares, and things like that. And it's, if anything, if any type of game in the tabletop space is polarizing, it's trading card games. And so people have a lot of just initial ideas about how they think things are going to play out. And so I want to kind of talk in a little bit about just the product design. The game itself, if you have every card, the entire library at your hands and you're playing through different, cards and deck builds and things like that, that's one thing. And then jumping into the product design of, okay, what's going to be common? How many are we going to have per pack? How many packs per box? What is that ecosystem do for the player and how does that play into the experience? I think that is one of the most interesting things that, there's just not a lot of information on. People don't, regularly talk about it. Um, and it's one of those things where I think, truly can make or break a game for some people. Cause like you said, if you're constantly having to shell out money, to get the latest and greatest stuff, then why is it different than any other game? So what kind of things have you guys done to kind of combat that?
So, well, combating power creep, it starts at a design level, and that's just we have to make sure that our designers aren't going crazy. We started with sort of a point buy system, if you will. So creatures have a point buy that will this is an internal document that we have where we can look at it and go, okay, I've got this many points to work with for a common card, and with those many points, I want this creature to have these numbers for the combat values, which cost me so many points. And this would be comparable to like a point buy system for creating a role playing game character. So a fifth edition D&D character, when you first create them, there's a point buy option, and basically as you are spending these points, you're putting them into strength, dexterity, all that stuff. Um, in our case, we have combat values. So if I can use this as a visual aid, we've got combat values on the top. Will this be the left, bottom, and right of the cards, and then we have the mana cost and the hit points, and then we've got abilities. So all those are variables that allow us to use our points when we're creating that creature. A certain ability might be 2 points of that point buy, might be 10 points of that point buy. If a creature has a really, really powerful ability, then balance wise, it really shouldn't have super high combat values. So these are just aspects of the design process that we have standardized on so that there isn't this, oh, I've got a common creature with nines all the way around and it can cast fireballs and stuff. That just can't happen because you don't have enough points to be able to do that. And there's a little bit of art also in there. It's not all science. There's the scientific process, which is okay, it only has this many numbers, blah 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 blah. But there are a certain amount, like there's interpretation of this ability is worth this many points. So there's a bit of art involved as well. But what we're trying to do is make sure that common, uncommon, rare, and ultra rare cards all have different amounts of point buy, if you will, so that there's not this like, well, this common card has the same exact abilities as this ultra rare. Like, what's the deal here? And I think you need that in a game where there's collectability and tradability and all that stuff. So that it makes sense. That's why all the games have some level of rarity to them. And our thought was, well, rarity is going to tell you how many points you have in your pool to be able to build out this creature. Then, as far as numbers are concerned, we standardized on a 1-to-3 ratio. So there are, if you have one ultra rare, there would be 3 rares, and then there would be 9 uncommons and 27 commons. So doing the math on that, you can see there's a 3-to-3-to-3-to-3 sort of ratio there. So to my mind, that makes it small enough, because if you did like a 5-to-1, then it'd be like insane, how big those numbers would get. So we're trying to stay with this theme of 3. There are a maximum of 3 of a specific title card in your deck, for example. Like Magic has 4. We did 3. There's a ratio of 3-to-1 when it comes to the rarities. The booster packs, you asked about the packaging and everything. The booster packs would contain 9 commons, 3 uncommons, and 1 slot for a rare or ultra rare, but that is in a ratio of 3-to-1. So that rare slot, you could call it, has 3 rares that it could be. It could be 3 rares, or it could be 1 ultra rare. So there you still maintain the correct ratio. So you've got a 25% chance of getting an ultra rare in that slot, and you've got a 75% chance of getting a rare in that slot. So still the rarity ratio is maintained. Now, that creates a 13 card booster pack, and we're looking at expanding the booster packs to include foil, like a foil slot that could be any card from that set. We're looking at a full art slot, which could be any card from that set. And then we're looking at a token slot. And these are all stretch goals, part of our Kickstarter. And so potentially we're looking at more of a 16 card booster instead of a 13 card booster. But of course, the nature of these games and Kickstarter and stuff is you sort of want to start small and then expand as you get the amount of funding that would be required to make the additional artwork, to make the additional production, because all these things cost money. So, but that's sort of an overview of the rarity, the logic behind it, and the packaging. And then as far as the other products that we're looking at would be like a starter deck. So a starter deck would come with 40 cards and have everything you need to go. So like it would include a Paragon. We're looking at 3 different starter decks. So continuing with the rule 3, basically. So 3 different starter decks, and they would all contain your Paragon, and the whole deck would be 40 cards. So a Paragon and 39 creature, item, spell cards, and all of these things are inspired by D&D. They're using spells straight out of any D&D product, anything you can think of within the OGL. There's some stuff we can't access just because that's proprietary to Wizards, but all the standard stuff that you can think of, fireballs and whatnot for spells, skeleton keys and, crystal balls and stuff like that for items. And then all of the creatures are going to be either things that are familiar to us from D&D or stuff that is somewhat inspired by, but like maybe you take it and you go, well, this is a different type of minotaur, or, this is a subspecies of goblinoid or whatever, these kinds of things. And yeah, so the product offering that we're looking at straight out the gate would be 3 starter decks, all different paragons and stuff in them. So 3 different themes, and those would consist of a life order paragon, which I showed earlier, a might chaos paragon, and an ether death paragon. And then all the cards inside are derivative from that. They're, those domains. And then we'd have the booster packs. And so booster packs would be sold in booster boxes, and starter decks could be sold in starter boxes as well, where they'd contain like 12 starter boxes. That's more for retail, but people would be able to buy starter decks individually, booster packs individually, booster boxes individually if they wanted a whole box. And the boxes would contain 32 booster packs. That's the plan right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know there's a lot of different ways that people are doing it now. Where, for instance, like Disney Lorcana, with as crazy as that's been recently, they've had it to where, it's 2 rare slots, and then but those cards aren't hollow. Like, they're just, if it's a legendary, it's just a plain legendary, right? Like, meant for playing and not necessarily for collecting. And then there's always that foil slot, like you mentioned earlier, something that was, it's any rarity, but it's a foil. And then of course they have their enchanteds and alternate art type stuff. Um, so it's a really interesting concept to play around with. Is with that, is there anything in Paragon that kind of lends itself towards that booster economy of, like, a booster draft? How much of your rules were incorporated into something like that?
Yeah, so drafting and stuff like that, super easy. In fact, you can pop 3 boosters and basically make a deck out of that. The plan is to have a box topper that is a domainless Paragon. So if you were to take your 36, excuse me, 36 booster packs in your box, on the top of that would be a little pack with 8 domainless Paragons. Now, again, earlier I said, a jack of all trades, master of none kind of a thing. They can do a lot of different things, but they're not going to be very specific to a certain style of gameplay. So you could take, an 8-player draft, for example, crack open one booster box, and everybody can draft and play. Now, certain people, they might find additional Paragons or something like that in their booster packs, because Paragons are an ultra rare thing. So they could, shift over and go, you know what, I got a bunch of these cards. I'm going to go ahead and use this other guy. But they always have the option of using the Paragon from the box topper. And that way they can use any of the cards that they got from their draft. So trying to enable draft play, and it doesn't, there's not a draft booster and a standard booster. It's just boosters, and you can draft from boosters, just straight out the gate. So that's the plan. And if we get the additional slots from our stretch goals, then that makes it even more that you could potentially more cards that you could potentially have from your draft. So 16, and one would be tokens. So call it 15. So crack open 3, and you got 45 cards to work with.
Hmm. And personally, I think that's one of the more exciting parts of trading card games is, if I want to get together with 3 friends, we go out and buy like a Pokemon box or something, or they have those build and battle packs now, or they've had them for a while. But most games have that to where you can get a box and a few friends together and um, you know just enjoy kind of not really knowing what you're going to get, and kind of, oh, I really don't know what my deck's going to look like because it depends on what's in my packs or what I might trade with my friends before we play. And I think that is such a core um, experience that designers of TCGs and also players of TCGs want to get. So how does that with opening sealed product and things like that, not knowing what you're going to get, how does the playability and the collectability kind of mesh together? Or maybe not necessarily collectability, but tradability, right? Because we are talking trading card games. We're talking people around the table saying like, hey, I got this, I want that, let's just
Yeah,
swap it real quick.
yeah. Well, I started trading X-Men cards back in 93, and that was a really fun experience. Just, oh, I've got a Wolverine, oh, I want the She-Hulk, whatever, and you start trade. I'll trade you 3 rhinos for, one She-Hulk, whatever. That was a fun experience. And, I was like 9 or 10 at the time. So as I got older, I look back on that time and think that was a lot of fun. And when I got back into Magic, I remember having specific cards, and I was like, "Ooh, this is super cool." And then a friend of mine had like another card. I'm like, "I don't really play blue decks, but he does, and he doesn't really play black or green, but I do." And so we were trading back and forth these different cards, and we both felt good about it. We're like, "Oh, I got this thing, you got that thing. All right, now let's fight." So it's stuff like that where I want to make sure that that's still there. I want to make sure that players enjoy the trading aspect of it, and they can further customize, because when you include all your friends and associates in your local game store and stuff in your pool of potential cards, now you can really get a lot more customability. You buy a booster box, for example, and you open them all up and you get some really cool combinations. but maybe you didn't get that one card you were really looking for. That new Paragon that's like the clockwork creature, and you're like, I really want that clockwork creature. I'll trade you, three of my whatevers, for it. So, however people come up with the economy around what the cards are worth and stuff, that's all up to them. But I'm I'm excited for that possibility, and people having that part of the experience. And then other people who don't want to trade at all, they just constantly collect and collect and collect, totally fine, and work on their own to try to build out that collection, and only cracking their own stuff, or potentially going to like a TCG player and buying exactly what you want and building out a deck exactly the way that you want it to be, and optimizing that way. Totally fine. We want to enable all different ways of playing and customizing your own deck.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's just that feeling that you can't replace um when you just pull that card that you want. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. It's just, well, that's awesome. Didn't think I was getting that.
we've
So,
we've had yeah we've definitely in our I mean, there's the pulling the card in the booster, obviously, that's always fun, but getting it when you are top decking, that's amazing. When you're like, okay, I know I've got at least one of these left in my deck. I really need, the Goblin Trickster. And then boom, I got the Goblin Trickster. They have the ability I really needed to be able to swap around this card or that card or whatever is going on. And now, I saved myself from getting knocked out on the 10th round. Whatever. That's the kind of thing that we really enjoy as gamers, is that, you only got one hope left, and boom, you were able to draw it. So we've had so many games where we've come up with those cool combinations, or had that really cool experience where I'm like, all right, I'm about to win this, and then let's say Bear or Jay or somebody else I'm playing against is like, well, I just drew exactly what I needed, and boom, now the tides have shifted and we're in overtime. And so that's super exciting, and the kinds of combinations that we've come up with, even with the pretty small number of cards we're working with right now, which is only 48. The goal is to get to about 240 through the Kickstarter. Even with the small pool of 48, we've had a lot of very cool combinations.
mhm. Yeah, and I think that's a big one because you know, it- people don't often think about it, but what part of what makes it fun is the stories you get to tell afterwards. Oh yeah, I remember that time I did this or I pulled this. Oh, remember that time I was about to whoop you and then you weaseled out of it. Those are the things that people want. Obviously having fun during the gameplay and everything, but I mean, there's a reason that people are drawn towards a physical table. And wanting to get together with friends and do these things because they want to get together the next time and be like, yeah, that's not going to happen again. And so I think that really plays into that. And like you said, on the trading aspect, I think on a personal level, to me, that's what's really gotten lost is the trading aspect of games. You can go buy cards, and yes, that's technically trading and all that, and that's perfectly fine. But just that level of local community style trading of I don't have this, or not everybody has the same game pieces at the start of the game. Let's swap some stuff and make it interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and the fact that on the drafting side, or even just the constructing your deck side of things, having the option of domainless paragons enables you to use any card you want. Now, it might not be especially strong in any specific play style, but you can still do it. And that, to my mind, is more of a uh, enabling instead of disabling. Instead of putting up more and more walls around how to play your game, make these minor changes that open it up, and takes down those walls and those barriers to entry, so that people can go, oh well, I don't have to just be in this specific, you know domain. I can create a deck that sort of does a bunch of different things. And it's like, yeah, you can try it, see how it works. Maybe it's going to be good, maybe it's not going to be good. But the fact that you're going to be up against somebody else who has, let's say 40 cards that may be totally different, and the order in which they are shuffled is totally different than any time they've ever played it before. And so boom, now you've got so much variability. Who knows how many different combinations, and how you place your cards down. how it's going to play out. So I've been in games where I was way ahead, and then on turn 9 I started to lose ground, and I could never quite recover because I made some missteps, and the other player just had the right cards and a better strategy than I did. And then I've had other games where I was losing all the way up until the very end, and then I made just the perfect plays, and it got me the win. And so those are the kinds of things where there's definitely, you never know who's going to win from one play to the next, just because of how the mechanics work. You could potentially place down one card, and the way that the when you control a visual aid time, when you control a card, it'll get a little token on it indicating that you control it. So let's say that I place down the Goblin Trickster, I'm going to place down the token on there. Well, if somebody else takes it over, they might put their token on top of it, on top of my token. Dexterity check. So let's say that the other player takes over the Goblin Trickster. They're going to put their token on top of my token. So now we know that it's my card. I mean, I own the card, but it's under the control of my opponent. Well, in some cases, let's say that you've got either an open spot in the very center and there's enemies all around, and you pop that guy down and they attack and successfully defeat all the creatures around them. Well, you put your token on your guy and all those guys around you too. So the most points you can make in a single turn is 5. So you put down your guy, you gain 5 points, and there's only 16 points on the whole battlefield. With a 6x6 grid, that's a huge play. We've had a couple of plays where people gained like 4 points. I've never seen a 5, but I've seen like 4 points gained in one play before. So those are the kinds of things where you're like, all right, cool. So I'm gonna zap that dude with a fireball, and then I'm gonna come in with a big swinger, and I'm gonna smash everything around me, and all of a sudden you totally changed the tides of battle, which that's the feel you get from a epic Dungeons and Dragons, rolling a 20, a nat 20, and all of a sudden, boom, we got critical hits going around. We got all kinds of cool stuff happening. So we wanted to keep that feel with the game. And, the fact that it is this tactical strategy and like grid based, your location on the battlefield matters kind of game, we really enjoy that aspect, and we feel it's very different from other TCGs that are on the market right now.
Hmm. Yeah, and there's not many that utilize kind of the positioning and grid based, a play style. So that's definitely a lot of ground yet to be kind of explored and discovered in that area. Um, but the last thing we'll touch on is we've gotten through the design of the game and kind of some of the product design and things like that, and then at the stage that you guys are at right now, which you're planning for your Kickstarter and things like that. um, can you talk a little bit about how you kind of make some of those final decisions on, okay, how much, at what point do we think it's good enough to present to try to get funding, or who are we going to use for our manufacturer? Some of those processes where you're trying to decide, okay, I want to know that whoever our business partners are, that we're going to get the best product possible, because we want that to be in the hands of our players.
I'll start with the manufacturing first, then we'll talk about marketing after that. So manufacturing, there are a ton of different manufacturers who can do board games and different game components, trading cards, booster packs, all that stuff. What you need to do is be in contact with them, try to get some quotes from them, different ideas. Hey, what if we did this? What if we did that? Different qualities of paper, cardstock, all that stuff. And timelines, figure out, how long it's going to take and all that stuff. But get some good quotes with some real numbers. Try to figure out how many will be in your booster pack. If you tell them, maybe 10, maybe 20, those are two wildly different numbers. You need to be pretty solid on how many cards will be included in each one of your various products. Then what are the materials are going to be included? Are you going to include dice or game mats or anything like that? Think about all these different accessories that may be included in our game. At its core, you've got cards and you've got the victory points. So what are those going to be made of? Right now these are just prototype in chipboard. Well, do we want plastic ones? Do we want clay ones? What do you want? So get all those sorts of ideas together and talk with manufacturers and find out what's possible. Also, if you can ever figure out how many cards are printed on a single sheet, you can usually optimize for that. So let's say that standard, I think it's about 110 cards are printed on a single sheet, poker sized. So if you built a game that had 111 cards per deck, that's a waste of one whole sheet to print. So whittle your game down, or work within the parameters of your manufacturer's capabilities, and you'll find that you can reduce costs that way. And anything that you can do to make things simpler for them when it comes to packaging and collating and that kind of stuff, it's going to save you money in the long run. And then think about logistics. Where are you going to have that shipped to, and then who's going to do your distribution and all that stuff. So if anyone is like really serious and you want to talk to me about it directly, we can figure that out. We'll provide resources for people. I'm usually very available on Discord and stuff like that. So I've been doing it quite a long time and happy to share the wisdom. And then over on the marketing side of things, like going into things like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or GameFound, BackerKit, all these different crowdfunding platforms. Yeah, like how do you get people interested? Well, I think most people, and I'm coming from a graphic design background here, I think most people are going to be pretty visually stimulated by or not by your product. So if you have a product that looks amazing, has good artwork and good graphic design and stuff like that, it's going to catch people's attention more than if you didn't. And the amount of effort that you put into that, and maybe get a graphic designer on board if you're not a graphic designer, and try to come up with a unique design, I think is going to be incredibly important. I know that a lot of people have looked at our cards on Facebook and stuff, and the first thing they say is, it's just a Magic clone. And I go, okay, so explain to me what aspects of this card look like Magic to you. And they're like, well, the artwork. I'm like, okay, so Magic has a eminent domain over anything fantasy themed artwork. And they're like, well, no. It's like, okay, well, so let me just explain. We have combat values on each edge. We have a domain symbol up here, a mana cost up here, and your hit points down here. This is very much different than a Magic card. The only thing that would even be remotely close is the description. But again, that's the kinds of things that we also see on other cards. We specifically designed the card like this so that we could have these numbers here. If we put the title up here, and the subtitle right there, then maybe we could start to look a lot more like a Magic card. But the fact is, we tried to take inspiration, but not just copy people, and just say, oh yeah, it looks like a Magic card. That's fine. No big deal. It was more like, well, we like these aspects of Magic and how they present stuff. We also like these aspects of Flesh and Blood, or Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh, like what are the things that we like from other games, and how can we make sure that the very first thing we talked about, the game gives the information to the player in the best, most consistent way possible, and I believe we've done that. So, and this is like the 6th revision of the design of the card. So we've gone from a lot of different things. At one point, all the combat values were in one corner, like on Triple Triad. And we said, well, we like them to be spread out more. It's a bit easier to figure out, just match up the numbers, when you put them side by side, so boom, they go side by side and you've got a 2 versus a 1. So easy. But yeah, so as far as marketing is concerned, I think that most people are going to be inspired visually. So having some really great graphics, I think, is going to be very important. A very important aspect is tell them what it is and what it does. Why should they buy it? The value proposition when it comes to marketing is super important. I want people to self qualify and also self disqualify. If it's not for you, I don't want you to buy it. But if it is something you're interested in, I want the title and subtitle and all that stuff to basically tell you what it is and what it does. So if you can have a game, in our case, Paragon, Monsters and Mayhem. Well, yeah, there's monsters in the game, and it's a pretty chaotic thing. Like, the battlefield is chaotic. There's a lot happening. I'm putting cards down. I'm defeating your creatures. I'm slaying your creatures, discarding this, discarding that. You're putting your stuff down. And ultimately, they're very simple mechanics. Like, the game itself is very simple, but the complexity comes with how you use the cards to attack and defend each other, how you use their special abilities to affect combat. So I'm trying as hard as possible to convey that with what I'm saying. Is it tactical? Well, then I want tactical to be a keyword in there. What is the theme? It's fantasy. Well, if you can't already tell from the artwork, including the word fantasy is probably a good idea. So trying to include all these things in your marketing efforts is going to help your potential customers to determine if it's for them or not. Because if all you're looking to do is sell product to suckers, then get out of our industry. What you're trying to do in our industry, and what most companies do, because I've been in it for a while and gone to a lot of trade shows and stuff, most of the developers are just trying to make a cool game that makes people happy. And as long as you're doing that and you're being clear about what the game is and why you should buy it, then you're on the right track.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a very good way to put it. Being open and transparent. I know there's been a lot of people tend to say there's a lot of secrecy around trading card games and things like that, but I feel like the more and more these games are made and that they come out, that there's a lot more transparency to what exactly you're getting and what exactly who the audience is and whether this game is for you or not. Um, so on that note, as we kind of wrap things up here, are there any other things about the design process of Paragon, whether that's game design, product design, anything like that, that you felt like was just kind of unique and interesting along that journey of getting to where you are now?
Yeah, sometimes it was just the way in which the idea would come to me or other members of the design team. Sometimes it came from sort of that lightning bolt or light bulb above your head, like, oh, what if we did this? And sometimes it came from finding that what we did decide to do simply didn't work, and there had to be a better way of doing it. And always being open to change, never thinking this is the way it's going to be, and because I decree it or whatever. It was more of a, I this works, but I don't feel we're there yet. Some people, I think there's a statement about art. Art is never finished; it's just abandoned. So it's kind of like that, where sometimes with game design, you find something that works pretty well, and maybe that's what you finally go with. But sometimes you, especially creative people, we might find, I'm not quite satisfied with where this is at. And sometimes that is what drives you to find a solution that you are satisfied by. And by all means, try what you can within reason. I mean, if all you did was every time you had an idea, revised your entire game, it wouldn't be very productive. But if you made small changes over time and had enough time to test those out and prove that they were working, then that's probably a better approach to the design process, at least in my mind. And also, depending on whether you're, like I said earlier, if you're solo or a team, what we did was it was just myself and Bear just heading up the design early on. Didn't show it to anybody yet. Just, we're working on it. not in secret, but just sort of like other people were asking us about it on the team, and we were saying, well, it's ready for you, at some point. And then we presented it to the whole team as if they were like, you know, investors or something like that, or potential players, just trying to show them this is our idea and this is how it works. And then we gave the presentation, opened it up for questions, and that allowed the rest of the team to see where we were coming from, and then we invited them to contribute with improvements and stuff like that. So I think that that was a really good way of handling it if you are going to include a larger group at some point in time. Establish some core concepts and the way that you think it should be done, present it to a larger team, and don't be offended when they have different opinions about it, or come up with their own ideas, because ultimately if you have a good team, huge asterisk there, but if you have a good team, you should be able to come up with a superior product through collaboration.
Mhm. Yeah, and that sounds great, and especially, the way you approached it was, you started off with just 2 designers, then you approached it from, "Hey, we're just gonna work on this now," instead of doing that, doing, "Hey, we're pitching this to you guys because we really need you to buy in. Like, we really need you to buy into this idea and this thing." So speaking of that, for anybody who's, interested in Paragon, and the way that this game plays and some of the unique things it brings to the space, where can people go to buy in now, to kind of get in early?
Great question. So there's a few different things you can do. You can go to our website, and that's going to have all the information on all the different places you can either get access to the game in its playtest form. We're on virtual tabletop as well, so it's tabletop simulator on Steam, and we also have the app on Steam. Like I said, that's sort of limited access. We have to issue a code so you can download it and stuff currently, but that should be wide open in the not too distant future. So you can just go to Steam, download it, and play with your friends and stuff. Um, then we've got our Discord. The links, we'll probably include all the links and stuff in the description and whatnot. But these are both great ways of just interacting with us, going to our Kickstarter and following the Kickstarter so that you're notified when it launches. Signing up for our newsletter, and that'll get you notifications on how things are going, and how things are shaping up when we're going to launch the Kickstarter. And we're also offering our fans a VIP pass. Basically, by purchasing the VIP pass on our website for $2, you get 3 booster packs when you back the project. So this is sort of how we're gauging the really dedicated interest. Following the project on Kickstarter is great, and we can usually get a pretty good idea of the interest there. But when we've got people who are actually like, yeah, I'll pay money now to reserve some extra booster packs for when it launches, that's huge. By the way, everything available on the Kickstarter will be marked as Founders Edition as well. So all of the product we fulfill to Kickstarter backers will have that mark on it. Anything produced after that will not have that mark. And we're talking like, let's say, let's say we get a large number of people that order. You don't want to throw a number out, but let's just say we get a large number of people that order from our Kickstarter, and we produce enough Founders Edition to fulfill their orders. Everything beyond that will no longer be Founders Edition. So this is a Kickstarter exclusive thing that will be very limited to only those people who backed the project. So moving forward, everything that's manufactured, even from this set, after after what we need for the Kickstarter backers, will not be Founders Edition. So just be aware of that. Trying out that sort of as an extra incentive reward, to get involved during the campaign. And yeah, but those be the best ways to check out the project. Always share it with your friends if you can. Our Discord community is growing more and more. We're doing playtesting on Saturdays and Sundays right now, usually starting about noon. And we can do them on Steam through our app, or on the Tabletop Simulator app as well. So either way, they've all got the same information on them. I think even the Tabletop Simulator one might have the next set of cards, which we're doing our sets in 48 card blocks. So it might have the next set of cards, just no artwork yet, just the 48 original cards have the artwork.
Gotcha. All right. Well, Chris, it's been great hearing about your journey from, you know, basically the very beginning and how you kind of got into the space, to when you decided to design Paragon and then moving forward to where you're at now. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking about that. And of course, for anybody interested in the project, like Chris just mentioned, there are definitely multiple places to go where you can get involved in the project. So, Chris, one more time, I want to thank you again for your time, and hope you have all the best with your game.
Thanks. This has been a lot of fun. I hope your viewers and listeners check it out and have a lot of fun with their TCG adventures.
All right, that was Chris Haskins, the lead designer of the Paragon Monsters and Mayhem TCG. Kind of just talking about the journey that he and his team took to get from that initial design idea, working through those initial goals, and to getting to where they are now. So it's kind of a different approach to what we've done normally with these episodes. I know it's been more topical before, but I felt like with this game in particular, I kind of just wanted to see what it'd be like to dive in and look at it holistically. Just kind of look at the design process from one game in particular. And if you want to check out some of our other content surrounding TCG design and things like that, you can visit our website at theboosterpacknetwork.com. And if you want to follow us on socials, our handle is at TBPN Content. And if you have any feedback, comments you'd like to leave for me about this episode or the show in general, you can reach me at j@theboosterpacknetwork.com. All right. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time.